Crimson Tide outside linebacker King Mwikuta has entered the NCAA transfer portal, and we need to talk about it, as well as Terrance Brooks, a top cornerback prospect that teams such as the Alabama Crimson Tide, Ohio State, Texas A&M, and others were after, has announced his commitment to the Ohio State Buckeyes, and he was a major target for the Crimson Tide, so we need to talk about where the Tide go next. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from y'all. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Were you surprised that King Mwikuta has entered his name into the transfer portal? I mean, that outside linebacker room is incredibly stacked, and we're going to get into all of that. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification, because I do constant college football content, and you don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoy that content, be sure to like, comment down below. Those interactions are massive to content creators such as myself. But with all that being said, let's kick it off with the news of King Mwikuta entering his name into the transfer portal. And Mwikuta is 6'5", really a talented kid from Georgia. And it's just kind of an unfortunate situation, because when you look at that outside linebacker position for the Crimson Tide, I mean, top to bottom, you look at the names in that room, and they are all really talented guys, Mwikuta included. But you're in a position where true freshman last year, Will Anderson, comes in and is sensational. And behind Will Anderson, you have Chris Braswell and Drew Sanders, two other 5-stars. And then opposite of that is Chris Allen, who has been a veteran now to the Alabama Crimson Tide defense and only finished the year last year very strong, looks to build upon that this year. And then when the recruiting cycle, you add in 5-star Dallas Turner. So right now, you look at that outside linebacker edge rush position for the Crimson Tide, and in 5 stars alone over the past 2 cycles, you have Will Anderson, Chris Braswell, Drew Sanders, and now Dallas Turner. So that room right there is a room that I think a lot of eyes for the Crimson Tide Nation were watching, because people expected a transfer coming from that room. Much like the running back room, I don't think people were surprised when there were some transfers from that room, given how incredibly loaded it was. The question was, who would be the one to transfer? Unfortunately, in the case of the outside linebacker room, it is King Mwikuta, but the depth at that position is still head-spinningly strong. And you look at the 2 starters, and both of those guys look poised for huge years. We saw Chris Braswell in A-Day being a complete disruptive force. Dallas Turner, one of the highest rated prospects the Crimson Tide have signed in the Nick Saban era, and Drew Sanders is a physical freak. I mean, that kid played everything in high school: quarterback, running back, tight end, wide receiver, inside linebacker, outside linebacker, defensive end. He can do it all, and he only displayed his athleticism on special teams multiple times last year. He's a name that I particularly am very interested in seeing how he develops from year 1 to year 2, especially with a full offseason. So it's unfortunate that King Mwikuta enters his name into the transfer portal, but hopefully he finds a team that is able to showcase his ability. He's a very talented kid. I wish him all the best, and we're going to be keeping up with where he ultimately goes. But now, I want to talk about some Crimson Tide recruiting real quickly, because the Crimson Tide were in for a little bit of a surprise this week when Terrance Brooks ultimately chose the Ohio State Buckeyes. And look, without going too deep into this is what I'll say about this situation, is that if you would have asked me and multiple other people a week ago this time, I think the unanimous decision was that the Alabama Crimson Tide were in a solid position to land Terrance Brooks, and it has been that way for the better part of a month. I mean, Alabama looked to be the favorite to land Terrance Brooks, who is an incredibly talented kid. Top 100 player, number 8 overall cornerback in the class of 2022, and he hails from the state of Texas. So particularly, where does Alabama go from here now that a talented prospect that they thought would be a part of this class is now a part of the Ohio State Buckeyes? Well, fortunately for the Alabama Crimson Tide, I think they sit in a good position, or at least they feel like they sit in a good position with Denver Harris. Now, I say a good position, there are multiple teams that feel like they're in a good position with Denver Harris, and rightfully so, and he's been forthright that this battle is still very much ongoing. He's very interested in multiple teams, but the top 4 we have of A&M, Texas, LSU, and Alabama, I would say that I believe that Texas, LSU, and Alabama have done a really good job in this battle right here. They all look to be in a good place, but even outside of that, I think the Crimson Tide have put themselves in a phenomenal position with Earl Little Jr., who is one of the top prospects on Alabama's board. I mean, they are super high on this kid, and when he came and camped, he only solidified why the camp likes him so much. And outside of that, that, you look at a 5-star Damani Jackson currently committed to USC. I think now that Brooks is a part of the Ohio State class, though the staff will still be after Brooks, I think we can see the pitch to a Damani Jackson turned up a little bit. Traquan Fegans from the state of Alabama, I think, is a name that now the staff are going to hone in on, try and get him a part of this class, because even though Terrance Brooks is a hit not being able to get him, it's much like the Shamar James situation, where even though Shamar James not being a part of this class, going to Florida, it's a hit. There's no way to go around it. However, the Crimson Tide are still in a phenomenal position with multiple top-level prospects, and we are still very early into the process, so there's no reason to panic. Remember, the Crimson Tide have their own way of evaluating, and I have a feeling that the rankings are going to shift amongst these players pretty drastically, given the nature of camps coming back and full seasons. So the Crimson Tide are in a position where they just want to get full evaluations, and I'm not worried about where they sit right now. I think the next few months we'll start to see the ball rolling on some commitments, and that right there is when it'll be incredibly interesting to see where the Crimson Tide goes. But ultimately, losing Shamar James, Terrance Brooks, they're hits, but hits that the Alabama Crimson Tide can take because of the other talented players they're looking at. Specifically at the DB position, you're talking Denver Harris, Damani Jackson, Earl Little Jr., Fegans, and whoever else they go after. It's going to be very interesting to see where the Crimson Tide turn now. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you think about the King Mwikuta situation, as well as where you believe the Crimson Tide will turn in the DB hunt now. That's it. See ya.